Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining this webcast. Today's webcast is titled CA Live API Creator Reference Call, hosted by Jeremy Sanders from Meridian Capital. I'm going to pass it over to Bill Oakes right now, who's going to do a quick intro on what we're going to be talking about today. Thanks, Bill.
Great. Thank you for joining us today for this call. With us today, we have Jeremy Sanders of Meridian Capital Group, and he'll be discussing his experiences with one of CA Technology's API management solutions. While all lines are muted, we are going to be taking questions during and after this call, so please do use the chat window accordingly. With that, let's get started. Thank you for joining us, Jeremy, and could you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about Meridian and your role there?
Sure, thanks. Hopefully we can keep people entertained today. Meridian is a commercial brokerage for mortgages, which means we broker the issuance of mortgages for office buildings, hotels, hospitals, residential buildings. By residential buildings, we mean like apartment buildings or apartment complexes. Anybody has a few $1 million and would like to finance buying a building, please be in contact with me afterwards. I'll put you in touch with a broker here. We also recently opened a new business in doing the actual brokerage of sales of buildings as well. The company historically has been focused just on mortgages, but some of our key competitors are actually primarily brokerages that have a mortgage brokerage arm, and so we're getting into that space as well a little bit. An example of that from the competitor list would be CBRE, which is primarily a sales brokerage, but also does pretty big business on the mortgage side. Meridian was the #2 firm last year in this space, and we're pretty busy, thank God. The business has come roaring back after having quite a hard time in the late 2000s with the financial crisis. But nowadays, people are buying and refinancing their buildings at a good clip, so the company has been growing a lot. I myself have been banging around for a few years. I started as a compiler designer, but got involved working on Wall Street mostly. Though I've had a few stints at an e-commerce company and at also a couple of ventures. I joined Meridian about 4 years ago. They were just starting to recover from the debacle of mid-2008, and I was brought in to evaluate where they were, and where they were wasn't so good. Particularly from a technology infrastructure point of view, and to a lesser degree also on the application side. We began working pretty quickly on rebuilding their entire infrastructure, and then now have been working on a new application. So,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Let's take a look a little bit. I think the next slide has the architecture of the legacy app. Yes. So the legacy application was a very classic two-tier client-server setup, and no doubt for circa 1995 when it was launched, it was probably a world-class kind of application, but it's not 1995 anymore. It's 2016, even in 2012 when we started working on analyzing where it was looking pretty creaky. The language it was built in was something called Magic. Very interesting 4GL, but not something that is widely used nor something that's easy to find talented people working in. It was using Btrieve, which has now been renamed as Pervasive as a database. The data model probably was not well aligned with the business to start with and has actually drifted even further from the requirements. but with enough bubble gum and duct tape, they were able to hold it together. And it is a working system, and it is a highly capable system. It's quite responsive to the users. It runs on their desktops. It's fast. It has a typical desktop application feel in which you click on something and things happen in a rapid way. Certainly not, let's say, a mainframe application. And but because of the aging technology and the movement away from this kind of structures, it's become quite expensive to continue to maintain it and to augment it. Augmenting and making changes is extremely lengthy and time-consuming. And in looking at this, let's can we skip to the next slide, Bill? Maybe I'm supposed to do that.
That's a great cover on your legacy architecture. What were your goals when you decided to move away from that, and what kind of solution were you looking to evaluate?
So, we didn't have a specific technology in mind, but I did know that I wanted to build something that was web-centric. I did quite early on determine that the existing system was not salvageable in terms of, okay, let's go and modify this or that. It would have to be rebuilt from the start. In doing so, of course, that would give us the advantage of moving to, more modern technology and to use languages and databases that are popular and widely used, and therefore that we'd be able to recruit from a wide range of talents to help us work on it. Additionally, we would fix the problems with the data model. And that's actually where we started, is by creating from scratch a new data model that we felt would represent what the business requirements were better. And then we determined that on top of that, we would build services to intermediate between the database and the application, and build an application using web technologies on top of that. This would allow us to have good separation of concerns between the database and the application logic and the display logic, and as well would allow us to be building an application that would be inherently mobile, even though it's still primarily going to be used on desktops. Increasingly, we see mobility as a key aspect of what's required, and this would set us on the path to being able to build additional versions or lightweight pieces or supplements to the primary application that would access the data through the same application tier, to the same data tier, using the services, but that would be able to be done in a very mobile way. So we actually built a prototype using Spring and a portlet, and at the same time, I was becoming involved more and more outside the company in building apps running on people's phones. And I came to have a pretty strong bias that we should look at that as an alternate architecture. And we, in fact, began to do so. And we looked at a wide variety of tools that would help us build the interface between the database and the front end once we determined to move away from Spring. So I would say those fell into three categories. Enterprise service buses, we looked at 3 of them. Data virtualization tools, we looked at 2 of them. And also, I happened to catch my eye on what looked like a very interesting tool, which is what's now called CA Live API Creator, and I thought it would be an interesting tool to look at. I did not think it would be what we would end up going with. I really actually thought we'd go with one of the other tools, but we included it in the mix, and let's skip ahead here. we actually ended up choosing it. Yeah, I've worked with a number of these other products that we looked at as well. I've done work with Mule, with TIBCO, with Talon, with composite software. Denodo that we looked at was relatively new prior to me, but was pretty similar in capabilities. It's a little bit more lightweight than composite. And they didn't show up so well on this. Mule and TIBCO, which are powerful ESB products, I don't know if anybody's used them here, still had a long way to go in extracting the data models and bringing those along as a way to populate the REST interface. It's certainly something I was expecting, and they didn't have it. Talon actually did have that, but on the flip side, it didn't have as nearly a good way of building the actual REST interface. It was creating the flows for the REST interface there were fairly complex. On the Mule side, you actually could write in RAML a specification, and it would build it, but without the data. You had to separately specify the data. Talon would pick up the data, but there was no easy way to specify the interface. In terms of connecting and extracting data from the database, of course, the virtualization tools did very well. Composite was, as expected, very impressive in this space, and it actually did what looked like an initially good job at generating services, but we discovered that what it was actually doing was building SOAP services and then sort of crudely mapping them to REST services. And as a result, the REST services were not actually being properly formed. And it would have required a significant amount of work to get those to come out right. In the meantime, CA Live, which we had looked at sort of as a lark, was able to knock the cover off the ball. It integrated beautifully with the database, pulled in, as well as the data virtualization tools, the underlying formats of the tables, and it creates out of the box in literally seconds the basic REST service for all the different artifacts within the database, the tables, the views, and the stored procedures and functions. Though some of those, I think there are still the functions I don't think you can call directly. And it does see them, and you can call the other three right away. It also included an interface for security and some very nice features on its ability within the REST service that in almost all the other tools we would have had to write code for by hand to implement pagination, sorting, filtering. It's a lot of work potentially, and here the tool came with them out of the box. It also has a number of concepts for augmenting the basic REST surface, and this is, of course, critical because the basic REST surface is basic, and when you're building a real application, you need to do more than just interact with a set of tables with 4 verbs. By using the resources, events, and rules, we were able to add all the customizations we needed. So far, we have not yet come across something that we needed to do that we weren't able to do, which clearly was a concern. With any of the tools, whatever we would need to do, we would be able to achieve within the tool without having to go to something outside of it. In particular, I will also note that coming from a heavy SOAP background at some points in my career, you get certain things with SOAP, which is you get the ability to create your operations based on what your application needs, and an operation can map to many different data endpoints. With REST, you inherently are mapping on a verb instead of through an operation, and you're mapping to a single data endpoint. Now, that's wonderful if you're building a little app for a phone that's, I don't know, looking up your geolocation or doing relatively straightforward information gathering. But once you're building a real enterprise-class application and you have people who are doing things within a complex data model which has relationships, you frequently need to have transactionality implemented between the different tables. And this is something that had been concerning to me as we were looking at the entire REST paradigm for our front-end application. And we were struggling with different ways that we would overcome it, which I was convinced we could. And in the end, the way to overcome it was just by using CA Live's resource mechanism, in which you can specify an internal endpoint within it, and you can add into that endpoint, that resource, several different database level endpoints, and it handles the entire update transactionally. So that was another out-of-the-box solution to a problem we were struggling with that it was already baked into the solution, and we were extremely happy to be able to take advantage of it. Because it's in Java and JavaScript, we were also able to integrate with other endpoints, which I think we have covered in the next slide.
Yeah, before we go on to that, let me ask you, a question has just come in from one of the listeners that he basically is asking, what is REST and why is this so important to you for this solution?
Well, REST isn't anything holy, but REST is a very elegant and portable interface that a whole new set of applications, I'd say even possibly most applications in the world today, are being developed to access data via REST. REST is a stateless, resource-focused interface. It's based on web technologies. It's focused generally, you use specific verbs, so it's pretty straightforward. It's much lighter weight than SOAP, which is itself a relatively lighter weight mechanism than earlier systems communications tools I've used, message queues or Cobra, Corba, etc. And it allows a very good separation between your front application and your back-end resources, and one that is very self-contained in that each piece is completely stateless. It deals with a limited set of information and can be combined together through multiple requests to put the information on relatively complex application pages as well as simple phone applications. It's a nice interface. Obviously, you can screw it up, just like you can screw up anything else. We just actually, as part of this, which we'll talk about, we did an interface with SharePoint, which Microsoft has created a set of REST interfaces for, but they managed to contaminate them with a sufficient amount of, Microsoft stuff that it's almost unusable. Did I answer the question?
Yeah, that was a great overview of that. Thanks. Following that along, can you tell us a little bit about the resulting benefits you've seen now that you've decided to go with CA Live API Creator, and what kind of impact you've seen on the development lifecycle as a result of integrating that into your solution?
So, as we can see here, we had a very positive impact. I would say we saved maybe 20 to 30% of the total project time that would have been spent on building either in Spring or in building by REST using other, Python or Nancy or some other mechanisms that we could have used to build a REST API, or with the other tools that we looked at. And based on how those other tools worked, I did not expect a big savings in effort. Here we experienced a significant, I would say, when you look just at the distribution interface side, I'd say we saved 90% of the time that could have otherwise been spent building the REST interface because of what CA Live facilitated. And of course, this is one of my favorite sayings, I don't know if it's original to me or not, that every line of code we don't write is a line we don't need to maintain. And long term, that's where some of the big money is and the big delays is every time we change the data model, every time we need a new field, every time the underlying structures change, if you build, let's say, using Nancy, a Sprock-based API distribution, you need to go in and recode those Sprocks. Here, I mean, giving a demo would actually be boring because it literally takes it seconds to relearn the data structure once you've changed it and reproduce the API. And it maintains all the pieces that have been added to that as we're adding different fields in, and it really helps us keep to our schedule and deliver what we needed to do. And certainly things like the handling of multiple tables and its implementation for us already of pagination, sorting, filtering, those all added to the savings in time that could have otherwise eaten up a lot of our time in delivering the application.
Great. Those are great benefits, and I agree with you on that second bullet. As a former coder, that was one of my least favorite things in the world to do was go maintain code. It's just not fun. And the last question before we open it up to general Q&A, can you tell us a little bit more about how you've extended the solution to integrate with your other libraries and services? You referenced SharePoint earlier.
Right. So SharePoint's a good example. While they have a REST, theoretically have a REST interface, I don't know what the technical term is, it sucks. But we were able to, in Java, write some code that connected to it and did what we needed. And basically how that works is we actually, the actual files that are being uploaded from our app are not stored in the database. They're stored instead in SharePoint, our document management system. So in working with Espresso, what we were able to do is we created a dummy field within the document table that is just a big blob that never gets populated. And as a result, in the database side, but by adding that column into the table, it now was created as a field, as a JSON field within the REST API. So our front end, which is all written in the ext5.js toolkit, it's an HTML5 coding SDK, I guess you'd call it, or IDE. And within that, it sees that thing, and it sees that column, and that's where the application puts the document. But when it hits Espresso, we have an event that tracks that that's an update to or a put or a post of a document. And instead of sending that to the document, it calls our Java library, which we wrote, and it's just some jars that get integrated into the system, and those parts get sent to SharePoint. When that comes back, then the rest of the result, which will now include the file name, a few other things, gets sent on to the database. Similarly, we have a set of jars that help us integrate the security, the authentication mechanisms that CA Live provides to our Active Directory LDAP system so that we are able to use the same exact sign-ons that people use on their PCs to log into the application, and that all the authentication occurs within LDAP. And we just get back a token that they are a valid user. We also have a document composition service. This has a few different pieces to it. One piece has template documents, either Excel or Word, that have special key values put into these documents, which then we generate final versions for the users based on various data values associated with whichever deal they're in. And also we have capability to take multiple different documents, Word, Excel, text, emails, PowerPoint, PDF, and combine them all into one PDF. So we're using a third-party tool to do all these things, a little bit of work on our part, but it's a clean REST interface, and that REST interface is able to be called directly from within the events and rules, I think that one's a rule, of CA Live. And as a result, we were very quickly able to integrate these tools in. Each one is its own separate product, but the front-end application on our side knows nothing about the existence of these different systems. The HTML5 app only knows about Espresso, communicates with Espresso, and these pieces are then hidden behind the Espresso interface, upon our REST interface as generated by Espresso. But through the rules and events, we were able to parcel out the needed pieces to these back-end separate services from the database.
Great, and for the listeners, Jeremy referenced Espresso several times. That is the former name for CA Live API Creator, for those of you who aren't familiar with that. And with that, we're going to move into the Q&A. We do have a few questions already popping up. We encourage you to go ahead and type them in if you have any, but I think Kristen wanted to say something before we got into that.
Yeah, so if you have any questions, please enter them in the Q&A window. I've seen a few questions come in through the chat window to me privately, but that means I'm the only one who can see them. So if you post them in the Q&A window, we can all see each other's questions and answers. So I did get, I know there's a few questions in the Q&A window, Bill, that you can take a look at and ask Jeremy. But one question that I received privately was, what did your ROI case look like, and how long did it take to develop? I didn't do a tremendous amount of ROI specifically on this because I already had an approved budget for the project. But clearly, there was a great ROI on this. I was able to fit in more of the other work I wanted to do because this allowed us to accomplish this piece of it in a shorter time frame than we expected. Okay, great, thanks.
Oh, go ahead, Chris.
I also just opened up a poll for everyone, so if you could please look at the poll and rate today's webcast. Go ahead and take the next question, Bill.
Great, and another one for Jeremy. Can you describe how CA Live API Creator is deployed in your environment? In other words, is there a single instance that handles all of your applications, or is it one instance per application?
Neither. That is to say, right now, it can be a single instance, and today we're actually running, we're running in QA right now a single instance. But in production, we're running multiple instances that we're load balancing between. However, yes, it is a one instance or one cluster of instances for all the applications.
Great, and hopefully that answers the question directly for the person who asked it. Another question that came in is, what do you use for orchestration between your different REST services?
So, as a good question, the answer is that this is not an ESB. We're not doing orchestrating flows but the interface that's exposed to the application is solely the interface generated by CA Live. Within CA Live, when those interfaces are called, we can have events occur that we can trap, or we can have rules that are fired off when certain, when a put is done on this resource, or when this kind of activity occurs on this set of resources. And we can associate either JavaScript or Java code with those events and rules, and those are then calling the further back-end REST calls that are needed, let's say, for the expose interface, or the Java library the interface library to SharePoint that we wrote, that is just a jar that gets added into the SharePoint, to the CA Live container.
Okay, great. Another one just came in. You kind of touched upon this before, but if you can elaborate maybe a little bit more, why did you choose REST over SOAP?
So I'm a big fan of SOAP for internal application-to-application development, because you're able to have a well-defined interface that is visible through the WSDL, but it also is a little bit more rigid than a REST interface. With SOAP, you need to change your WSDL anytime you're changing your data elements or adding changing what your operations are. REST is lighter weight and more flexible, and I think more apropos for customer-facing, an application that faces customers, either internal or external. If you want to add fields, you just add them. There is no cost, no configuration work needed. Either the application knows how to handle that field and pulls it out of the JSON, or it doesn't, and in which case it doesn't use that field. So in terms of moving forward with a application that we expect to be continuously changing over time, and in terms of being able to rapidly have a very good time to market on changes to that, I think for a user-facing application, REST is the superior mechanism.
Great. Here is another one for you. Since the time necessary to generate an API is the greatest cost involved in the building of an API, have you found any uses for an API now that the cost is driven down and it's faster to build?
I didn't understand that question. I mean, do I find any use for the API?
So let me reread it and see if I can break it down. Since the time necessary to generate an API is the greatest cost involved in that building of the API, which I would agree, APIs are very time-consuming to build, have you found any other uses for the APIs now that the cost is driven down and it's faster to build?
Not that I can think of offhand. I mean, the API is how we're, supplying information to the application. We certainly look at it as something we're going to reuse for many other versions of the application going forward as we begin to create now have the ability to create smaller, lighter weight, limited functionality subsets for end users. But I don't think we've seen anything radically new to do with APIs other than that.
Okay, that's fair. And here is one, the last question that's currently out there. What's that?
Open to suggestions of what else we could do with APIs.
Okay, great. This is the last question that's outstanding right now. If you have any other questions out there listening, please jump in. This question I find especially appealing, though. Of all of the advantages you've pointed out, which one benefit did you find the most appealing? And that, I believe, is,
Wow.
I'm assuming that's tied to Live API Creator.
I would say the out-of-the-box functions that came with the system of handling multi-table resources transactionally, and as well the pagination, filtering, and sorting.
Perfect. Okay, well, it looks like that's the last of the questions. So what I'd like to do is thank you, Jeremy.
Actually,
for your
one
insight.
more that just came in,
Okay.
but I don't know if you guys want to answer that. I think it might be more of a question for the API product team than Jeremy. So I don't know if you, Bill, or Jamie wants to touch on that one from Brian Smith.
I'm not seeing an additional one.
Question
how was very bottom. It just came in. Yeah, how was the runtime performance of CA Live API Creator?
It's been excellent. I can't claim that we've stressed it over much in terms of scale, but we haven't had any problem, any performance issues with it whatsoever. And we're passing, for example, in the documents, quite large amounts of information. I mean, our documents are bigger than I thought would easily go through a REST call initially, but it's been handling it just fine. It's been excellent.
That's definitely good to hear. And with that,
and there was one other question, actually. Okay. I'm not sure if you touched on it. It was from George about lifecycle management of the APIs created. Did you see that one?
I did not.
Yeah, it's not showing on mine either.
Okay, I can just read it out loud. He wrote, can you talk a bit about the lifecycle management of the APIs created? I heard it was in Java and JavaScript, keeping up with currency, newer Java version, et cetera.
Well, the API is a REST interface. It's not inherently Java or JavaScript or anything else. It happens that the Espresso engine is in Java, and some of the libraries that we've written or functionality we've written have been in JavaScript and Java, but we haven't seen any, I mean, obviously there's JavaScript and, Java engine updates all the time from Oracle, but we haven't seen any yet that have impacted any of the usages that we have. There's been, so far, over the year we've been working with this or so, zero impact on our environment from changes to Java and JavaScript. In terms of life cycle within our own development of the API, I mean, we did lay out, before we even selected the CA Live, we did lay out a pro forma description of what the REST interface should look like. It wasn't necessarily meant to be the exact target, but what we've built is pretty much on spec for what we expected to have. And as I said, the tool really helped us get there in a much faster time period than we expected to.
Great. And have you seen any more come in, Kristen? I'm not seeing any more on this end.
No, I don't see. Oh, one more oh no, he was just saying thanks. Okay, so no more questions. I was just typing in the chat window that we'll be posting the slides and recording from today's webcast to the API management community later today. I'll also be sending out an email as well to all of those who attended the webcast today. But make sure you follow the API management community to receive important updates about our API products, as well as upcoming webcasts like this one, and also our monthly office hours sessions where you can come and ask any question you might have about any of our API products. So thanks everyone for attending today. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Jeremy. And like I said, you'll be receiving an email from me either later today or tomorrow with all the links that you need to access the recording and the slides.
Great. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for your attention.
Thank you. Have a great rest of your week.